Welcome to Sleepless Exorcism, where real darkness whispers just before sleep. Before we begin tonight's story, what time is it where you are right now, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We're listening even in the silence. Tonight's tale is not fiction. It's a chilling account based on true reports of demonic possession set in a remote Romanian village. She was just 19 when she began screaming in perfect Latin. But she had never studied a word of it. This is a sleep story, but not the kind that brings comfort. It's a slow descent into something ancient, something terrifying. So lie back, dim your lights, and let your mind open. But be warned, not everything that enters your dreams is yours. You're watching Sleepless Exorcism. Now, let's begin. She screamed in Latin, but had never learned it. Her voice wasn't hers, it wasn't even human. The first time I saw her, she was sitting upright on the edge of a hospital bed, wrists wrapped in gauze from where she had bitten through her own skin. There was something unnatural about how still she was, not the stillness of calm, but of something waiting. She didn't blink when I entered. Her name was Daniela Stoica, age 19, admitted 2 nights ago to the county psychiatric hospital in Piatra Neamț, northeastern Romania. I was there as part of a medical inquiry. At least, that's what the official letter said. My real reason was different, and much harder to explain on paper. The file in my hand had the usual clinical labels: hallucinations, psychotic break, self-inflicted injuries. But the nurses were whispering something else. They said she spoke in languages she had no reason to know. Latin, sometimes Aramaic. She hadn't attended university. She hadn't finished secondary school. Her education was patchy. Her village was remote. And yet, when the door closed behind me, the girl looked straight into my eyes and said, in fluent, guttural Latin, "Tu nescis quid hic latet." You do not know what hides here. I froze. Daniela had grown up in the tiny village of Valeni, about 30 kilometers from the city. Her mother died when Daniela was 12, and she lived with her father, a quiet man who worked nights at the paper mill. She had no siblings. Locals described her as polite, withdrawn, religious but not obsessive. She never caused trouble, never stood out. The first incident was reported by her cousin, Mirella, who found Daniela standing barefoot in the snow outside their church, lips moving silently, eyes wide. That was in December of 2003. Over the next 3 months, her behavior worsened. She refused to eat certain foods, said she couldn't sleep in her room, claimed there was something breathing under her bed at night. Doctors thought it was post-traumatic grief. They prescribed sleep aids, antipsychotics. Nothing worked. By February 2004, she was screaming, violently, clawing at her own skin. She tried to tear out her tongue once, saying it wasn't hers. Then came the voices, not just heard by her, but from her. Multiple tones, sometimes speaking simultaneously. One sounded like a man, deep, gravelly. Another, like a child. The Latin came shortly after that. I spoke to the attending physician, Dr. Cristian Lupescu, who looked exhausted and uneasy. "I've worked psych for 15 years, he said, lighting a cigarette in the hallway despite the no smoking signs. Schizophrenia, catatonia, split identity. But this girl? It's different. He handed me a tape recorder. It was labeled simply, Room 17, Daniela, 12th March, 3:12 a.m. I pressed play. The recording began with a distant thump, like furniture scraping. Then her voice, shrill and frantic, "Te rog, nu din now. Please, please, not again." Then a silence, followed by a low, guttural voice. It was not hers. "Numquam exis hinc." You will never leave here. What unsettled me most was the tone. It didn't sound theatrical or performed. It sounded old, heavy with something I couldn't name. Her father refused to visit the hospital. He told the nurses he didn't recognize her anymore, that it wasn't Daniela inside that room. Mirella, her cousin, was the only one who stayed in touch. She met with me in the hospital cafeteria, a tired woman in her early 20s, clearly shaken. "She was never like this," Mirella said, twisting her hands. "Daniela was soft, She cried during animal documentaries. She never cursed, never shouted. When did things change, I asked. She hesitated. After that day in church, she said she heard the Virgin whispering behind the altar, but when she turned, there was nothing. After that, she stopped going inside. She said something followed her home. A hallucination? Mirella shook her head. No, something came with her. Later that night, I returned to room 17. Daniela was facing the wall, whispering to it like it was alive. The lights above her bed flickered slightly. A nurse said the power on that floor often went out, but only near her room. I stepped inside. She didn't turn, but her voice lowered, almost as if she knew I was there. Dormis et videbis. It was Latin again. I translated mentally. Sleep, and you will see. Then slowly she turned her head, eyes wide, hollow, glassy. You're not from here, she said in perfect Romanian. Why did you come? I took a step back. I'm trying to help, I said carefully. No one helps, not anymore. They've all left. Even he doesn't answer me. Who? I asked. Daniela's scream cut through the corridor like a blade. It wasn't the cry of a terrified girl. It was something else, something layered. One voice sharp and feminine, the other low and ragged, like the final breath of a dying man. They overlapped in perfect dissonance. I was 3 doors down, reviewing her medical charts when the sound erupted. The lights in the hallway buzzed, then dimmed. A nurse named Claudia dropped her clipboard. I remember her face, pale as milk, eyes wide. It's happening again, she whispered. By the time I reached room 17, 2 orderlies were already holding Daniela down. Her body arched unnaturally, back bent so far I feared it would snap. Foam pooled at the corners of her mouth, tinged with something darker. Blood. Hold her, one of them shouted. She's biting again. Her eyes rolled back, her lips moved rapidly, Latin again, relentless and furious. She thrashed with a strength that defied her size. Beneath the chaos, the childlike voice cried, Ajuți-mă, vă rog, nu vreau să fiu aici. Help me, please. I don't want to be here. Then, abruptly, it stopped. She collapsed flat onto the bed, limbs splayed, eyes wide open, unblinking. Everyone backed away. The air in the room felt dense, like the moment before a thunderstorm, when the atmosphere thickens and the skin prickles. Someone whispered the Lord's Prayer. Another made the sign of the cross. Daniela lay motionless. The silence was worse than the screaming. That night, I reviewed the hospital's incident logs. This episode wasn't her first, only the most violent. Since her admission, there had been 7 others. Always at night, always accompanied by guttural speech, unnatural strength, and periods of catatonia. A neurologist had conducted 3 MRIs. Nothing. No tumors, no abnormal activity. Blood tests, hormone panels, EEGs, clean. A visiting psychiatrist from Bucharest had diagnosed her with dissociative identity disorder, but even he admitted her symptoms didn't fully align. She's not fractured, he said in his report. She's being used. The drawings had worsened. They weren't childlike anymore. They were deliberate, precise. One showed a small, kneeling girl surrounded by 4 shadowed figures. Each figure had no face, only open mouths. Latin words were scrawled above them. Per me transit in locum perditionis. Through me enter the place of damnation. I took that one with me. I returned to room 17 early the next morning. Daniela was awake, sitting up, but she wouldn't look at me. Her hands were trembling slightly in her lap. I sat down at the foot of the bed. Do you remember what happened last night? I asked. No answer. You spoke in Latin again. 2 voices. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then barely above a whisper, I try not to let it speak, but it always finds its way. What is it? Her head tilted, slowly, like a puppet. Her eyes met mine. Something flickered in them. Not recognition, not fear, awareness. You still think this is in my head, she said. I'm trying to understand. Her smile was slight, pained. Then stop looking at me. Start looking around me. Later, I met with Father Pedro Angel, the chaplain assigned to the hospital. He was cautious, skeptical. "She is sick," he said plainly, "but she is also not sick in the way medicine understands. That distinction is important." I asked if he'd performed any rites. He shook his head. "No authorization. The church requires a full investigation, proof of genuine possession, not hysteria, not delusion." "Isn't that what this is?" I asked. He looked tired, haunted. "She speaks dead languages, knows things she shouldn't. The Latin she uses, it's not ecclesiastical, it's pre-Christian. I had to consult an archivist in Suceava just to understand some of it. And she speaks of a name, over and over, but never directly. Only hints." "What name?" He paused, then wrote something on a scrap of paper and slid it to me without a word. I read it, one word: Valak. That night, Daniela was moved to a padded isolation room after trying to gouge out her left eye. She told a nurse that it watches me from inside. Security footage showed her pacing for nearly 3 hours, muttering to the walls. At one point, she stopped, stared directly into the corner camera, and grinned. No one who saw the footage slept well. I visited Mirella again. She seemed reluctant to speak now, more withdrawn than before. Finally, I asked if there had ever been anything strange in the house where Daniela grew up, anything old, inherited, or hidden. She went quiet. "There was a cellar," she said slowly, "under the back room. Her father sealed it when Daniela was young, said it was dangerous, mold or rats." "Was she ever down there?" Mirella hesitated. "She used to say she heard something under the floor, whispering. I made plans to visit the house in Veleni. I needed to see it for myself. I didn't yet believe in demons, but I did believe in trauma, and trauma has roots. As I packed my bag, I thought about Daniela's words, start looking around me. What was I missing? Before I left the hospital, I stopped one last time outside room 17. The door had a new scratch mark, deep, jagged, fresh. It hadn't been there yesterday. Inside, Daniela was curled in a fetal position, lips moving silently. I leaned my head against the door. Just faintly, I heard the words, "Non exeat." It will not leave. And for the first time, I felt fear crawl under my skin, not for her, but for myself. The drive to Veleni took just under an hour, winding through hills and dead forests still frozen in the early spring thaw. The road grew narrower the deeper I went. By the time I reached Daniela's childhood home, I hadn't seen another vehicle for almost 20 kilometers. The house sat alone near the edge of a copse, flanked by withered cornfields and skeletal trees. Its roof sagged, windows boarded in places. The wooden fence was partially collapsed, and the yard was littered with old farm tools and wind-blown leaves. There was no sign of recent upkeep. A neighbor watched me from across the road, barely visible behind curtains. No one came out. No one waved. Daniela's father, Ilia Stoica, hadn't responded to my calls. He hadn't visited his daughter since her hospitalization. The hospital staff said he only called once, in January, to ask if she was still alive. I knocked on the door twice. No answer. I tried again. Eventually, the door creaked open from the inside. Ili stood in the shadows, sunken eyes peering through a slit in the door. He looked older than his 50 years, skin grayish, hair unwashed, frame brittle. "You're here about her," he said flatly. "I need to see where she grew up." He stared at me a moment longer, then stepped aside. No welcome, no words. The inside of the house smelled of damp rot and oil. Wallpaper curled at the corners. The floor sagged in places. There were crucifixes on every wall, some nailed askew, others clutched in bundles with rosary beads wrapped tightly around them like chains. Ili sat in a worn chair and lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. She was a good girl, he said, until she wasn't. When did it start? He looked away. I don't know. After her mother died, something changed in her. She started drawing strange things, talking to herself. Did she ever mention hearing things under the floor? His jaw tightened. She lied. She said there's a cellar, I continued. Mirella told me you sealed it. I said she lied, he repeated, louder this time. There's nothing under there, just earth and memory. I stayed silent. After a long pause, he stood and walked slowly to the rear hallway. Without speaking, he removed a faded rug. Beneath it, a square outline in the wooden floor. A trapdoor, reinforced with rusted iron latches. She opened it once, he muttered. When she was small, I found her down there, whispering into the dirt. He unbolted the latches one by one. The iron groaned. The trapdoor creaked as it opened. A blast of cold, stagnant air drifted up. No light, he said, and don't stay long. The cellar descended via narrow stone steps into a cramped underground room, no more than 10 feet across. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The air was dry but pungent. Earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Along the back wall, I noticed strange scratches etched into the stone. Symbols, crude, deliberate. Some resembled inverted crosses, others were unfamiliar. Beneath them, bones, small ones. Animal, I hoped. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. A circle, about 1 meter wide, drawn in blackened wax or ash. Around it, letters I didn't recognize. But I knew enough Latin to make out fragments. Valac, Imperium, Flamma. I knelt for a closer look. The circle had been disturbed recently. Dust pushed aside, markings faded near the center. Someone had been inside it. The beam of my flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. From above, Ilya called out, "You've seen enough." I didn't argue. Back upstairs, I asked him where Daniela had learned those symbols. She didn't learn them, he said, voice distant. She remembered them. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew I wouldn't get a clear answer. His eyes told me that whatever haunted him started long before her breakdown and went far deeper than he was willing to admit. As I left, he handed me something wrapped in old linen. "I found this in her room," he said. "I burned most of the others." Inside was a drawing, ink on parchment. Daniela's unmistakable hand, a depiction of herself, hunched and skeletal, bound by ropes. Above her hovered a faceless figure with black wings and burning eyes. Its mouth was open wide. Something, a tongue, a serpent, a shadow, stretched downward, coiling into her chest. Beneath it, a single word, Valac. That night, I returned to the hospital shaken. The events of the cellar refused to leave me. I found myself checking shadows, avoiding mirrors. When I stepped off the elevator to the psychiatric wing, a nurse rushed toward me. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. "Daniela, she's drawing again." I followed her into the observation room. Daniela sat in the corner of her isolation cell, curled forward with her back to the camera. A crayon gripped in her right hand, scratching furiously against the wall. "Where did she get that?" I asked. "We don't know. Her room was cleared." On the monitor, I watched her draw something circular, repeatedly. Then, without warning, she turned and faced the camera directly. Her mouth moved, though no sound came through the glass. A nurse adjusted the audio dial. A whisper filtered through the speaker. "Did you like my house?" I stepped back. "She couldn't know you went there," the nurse said. But I wasn't listening anymore, because Daniela wasn't just staring into the camera. She was smiling. Daniela's smile stayed frozen on the monitor, her face eerily calm, as if she'd been waiting for me to see it. I asked for the recording to be played again. Same whisper, same exact timing. Her mouth moved in sync with the words, "Did you like my house?" I turned to the nurse. "She hasn't spoken since I left?" "Not a word," she replied. "Not until you walked back in." I reviewed the footage from earlier that day. Daniela had been unresponsive for hours, barely moving, but around 2 p.m. she began pacing. She circled the room 3 times, each lap slower than the last, before suddenly sitting down and drawing a circle on the wall with a red crayon. Not just any circle, the same shape I'd seen in the cellar, same markings, same orientation. Her lines were smooth, practiced, like she wasn't drawing from memory, but repeating something she'd done before. "Where did she get the crayon?" I asked again. No one had a clue. Her room had been cleared of everything, even the mattress after her last outburst. "She had it in her palm," said Claudia, the night nurse. "We thought it was blood at first, but it wasn't." I returned to the security office and requested to view the hallway camera that monitored room 17. At 1:53 p.m., Daniela was lying flat on the floor, unmoving. At 1:54, the feed cut to static. All hallway feeds, not just outside her door, flickered out simultaneously for exactly 66 seconds. When the video returned, she was standing, and she was smiling. I met with Father Angel again. This time he brought me to the back office of a small chapel behind the hospital. He closed the door, pulled the blinds, and locked the drawer of his desk before speaking. "I spoke to a colleague in the Vatican," he said, voice low. "One who handles cases like this, quietly." He laid a photocopy on the table, an ancient page from a 15th century manuscript, a forgotten text on demonology written in archaic Latin. It was a crude woodcut illustration, a black-winged creature sitting atop a throne of bones, surrounded by the Latin phrase Rex Deceptionis, venit in voce innocentiae. King of deception, he comes in the voice of innocence. Beneath the figure, the name Valak. "They say he appears as a child or speaks through one," the priest said. "He's known for manipulation, for hiding beneath the familiar." I stared at the image. The creature's hand rested on the head of a kneeling girl, the same pose from Daniela's drawing. "What does it want?" Father Angel shook his head. "With demons, want is the wrong word. It is. It doesn't need motive, it just infects." Back at the hospital, I asked to see Daniela again. She was sitting upright, watching me enter like she had been expecting it. Her wrists were bandaged again, though there was no sign of fresh blood. She looked physically weaker, paler, thinner, but her expression was sharper. I sat across from her, staying behind the safety line marked on the floor. "You've been drawing," I said. She nodded slowly. "Where did you get the crayon?" She looked down at her hand and turned it over as if surprised to see it empty. Then she smiled. "I woke up with it," she said simply. I leaned forward. "Who is Valak?" Her body stiffened. Her eyes glazed over for a moment, and she tilted her head as if listening to something in the room that I couldn't hear. Then softly she whispered, "He says your name." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Who does?" Her gaze locked with mine. The voice that followed was not Daniela's. "The one who walks with you." She blinked, just once, then laughed, softly, lightly, like a child telling a secret. "I didn't want him to pick me," she said. "I used to pray, every night. But he doesn't answer anymore. Only he does now." She pointed to the ceiling. "No, below," she corrected herself. "He listens from below." That night, a doctor named Florin Rousseau came to me in the break room, a practical man, atheist, clinical, but he was shaking. "She called me by my grandfather's name," he said. "He died when I was 6. I never told anyone in this hospital about him." "What exactly did she say?" "She said, 'Don't let it in like he did.'" His voice cracked. "He killed himself in his barn, hung himself. They found Latin scratched into the walls." I didn't have an answer. I just listened. By the end of March, Daniela had entered a new phase, less screaming, more awareness. Her speech slowed, but her words became colder, more precise. In one session, she began repeating a phrase over and over in Latin. I wrote it down phonetically, then translated it later. "Let the house become the altar. Let the altar become the gate. Let the gate be opened." When I confronted Father Angel with this, he sat in silence for a long while. Then he simply said, "We need the church's permission. Immediately." "You think this is real now?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. On the morning of March 28th, Daniela disappeared. Her door was locked, no windows in the isolation cell. 3 guards on duty. Yet the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no blood. Nothing on the cameras except 10 minutes of static at 3 a.m. Only one thing was left behind, a single word scratched into the cement wall in what looked like nail or bone. Apparatus. It is opened. The cell was cold. That was the first thing I noticed. The kind of cold that didn't match the weather outside. Deeper, unnatural. Like walking into the mouth of something breathing from far below the earth. Daniela was gone. No sign of a forced escape. No broken locks. No hidden passages. Just the word apparatus gouged into the cement wall. Letters sharp and deep, as though scraped in with bone or nail. And yet her fingers had been wrapped in gauze the day before. She shouldn't have been able to move them, let alone carve stone. The hospital went into lockdown. Police were notified, and a full search was initiated. Nothing. No sightings, no footprints, no security footage. Every camera between 2:56 and 3:07 a.m. showed only a black screen. Not static, just absence. A total void. The technician on duty, a man named Theodore Van Seyer, tried to explain it as a power fluctuation, but even he looked pale. "I've seen outages," he told me. This wasn't that. This was like something deleted the feed, like the hallway stopped existing for 10 minutes. When the cameras returned, Daniela was gone. Her cell was sealed, her restraints unbroken. I reviewed the last footage from her room before the blackout. At 2:55 a.m., she was sitting in the far corner, rocking gently. Her lips moved, but there was no audio. Her eyes were closed. Then, at exactly 2:56:04, her head lifted, fast. She looked straight into the lens. Her lips parted. She mouthed a single word. "Appari." Then the feed went dark. By noon, investigators were treating it as an escape, but no one really believed that. There was no logical explanation. The head nurse, Claudia, requested emergency leave the same day. "I don't care what it is," she told me. "It's not human." Father Angel, unusually quiet, brought me a page from an obscure 17th century exorcist's journal. He pointed at a phrase in Latin, "Appari oculus interior, appari portum." Open the inner eye, open the gate. "It's ritual language," he said, "from texts banned centuries ago." "You think she's part of a ritual?" "No, I think she is the ritual." I returned to Valeni that afternoon. The house was dark again, curtains drawn. Ilya Stoica answered the door but refused to speak. "Did she come back?" I asked. No response. I asked again, louder this time. He opened the door a few inches wider. "You think she ever left?" he said, eyes red and wide. Before I could answer, he slammed it shut. I checked the cellar once more. This time, the circle had changed. What had been a faded wax outline was now sharp and dark, fresh. The Latin around the edges had been re-etched. The soil inside the circle was disturbed, clawed at, like something had either emerged or been buried. And there were footprints, bare, small, Daniela's size. But here's what chilled me to my core. The footprints led into the circle, not out. That evening I returned to the hospital. Police had begun combing nearby towns and Mirella had been called in for questioning. I sat with her in the chapel while she waited. She looked exhausted, eyes swollen from crying. "She called me," she whispered. I looked up. "When?" "2 hours ago from a payphone." "What did she say?" She said, "I see it now." Then she hung up. "Where was the phone located?" They traced it. A village called Stanka, north of Bikaz. It's barely a dot on the map. Stanka. The name rang a bell. I searched through Daniela's early drawings, the ones she'd made in the psychiatric ward, before the screaming began. One sketch in particular stood out. A crooked building on a hill surrounded by blackened trees. There was a road sign at the bottom. In her childish handwriting, STANCA. She'd drawn it months ago, before the possession turned violent, before she disappeared. Father Angel and I left the next morning. The drive took almost 2 hours through fog-thick mountain roads. No signs, no lights. When we finally reached the village, it barely qualified as one. 5 homes, all abandoned. Windows shattered, roofs collapsed. An old church stood on a rise, its doors chained shut, wood rotting. At the edge of the village stood a well, sealed with iron bars. Beside it, a payphone, old, rusted, out of place. It was still warm. Inside the church, we found candle wax puddled around the altar. Black wax, not white. The crucifix had been removed. In its place, carved deep into the stone, apparitus. As we stepped back outside, I noticed movement behind one of the houses. A figure, small, pale. I ran, Angel behind me. The ground was slick from last night's rain, and I nearly slipped as I rounded the corner. There, in the tall grass behind a crumbling shed, stood Daniela. She looked thinner, almost translucent. Her skin stretched tight across her cheekbones. She wore the same hospital gown, though it was now streaked with dirt and torn near the hem. Her eyes met mine, not frantic, not pleading. Still, calm. And then she spoke. It opened. I reached out to her. She stepped backward. Father Angel raised his crucifix and began muttering a prayer under his breath. Daniela's mouth twitched. Not into a smile, but something worse. A twitch of recognition, as if what looked out through her eyes recognized the rite. "Stay with me," I said. "Please, come back." Her lips parted. Then a voice, one I had never heard from her before, said low and ancient, "You are late." She collapsed. No scream, no struggle, just fell limp into the wet grass, face tilted to the sky, mouth slightly open. Her eyes rolled back. No pulse, no breath. Father Angel dropped to his knees, checking her vitals, whispering frantic prayers. I stood frozen. We thought she had died, until her eyes fluttered. She took one breath, sharp and desperate, and whispered something I'll never forget. "He's not in me anymore." A pause. Then, with her last ounce of strength, "He's in the house now." The rain had started again by the time we lifted Daniela from the grass. Her body felt weightless, not just from how thin she'd become, but like whatever had once anchored her was missing. She was alive, barely. Her pulse was weak. She didn't respond when we called her name. Her eyes fluttered open occasionally but didn't focus. We drove her back to the hospital in complete silence. Not once did she speak again on that ride. The psychiatric wing staff, already rattled, froze when they saw us carry her in. A few stepped back instinctively, like we'd brought a live grenade through the front door. "She's stable," Dr. Lupescu said after examining her. "But she's not responsive. Catatonic." "She was speaking before we brought her in," I told him. "She said he's not in her anymore." Dr. Lupescu looked at me. "Then where is he?" I didn't answer. That night, I stayed in room 17. I wanted to see it, to feel what she felt. I needed to understand. I turned off the lights and sat in the chair by the wall, a notepad on my lap, tape recorder running. At 2:14 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Not gradually, instantly. The breath in my throat became visible. The walls creaked, but no wind followed. The hair on my arms stood up. Then I heard it, the tap. A slow, deliberate tapping from beneath the floor. Exactly where Daniela's bed had been bolted. I stood and stepped quietly over. It wasn't mechanical or rhythmic. It was intentional, like someone knocking, from underneath. Tap, tap, tap. I lowered to my knees, pressed my ear against the tile. The sound stopped. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not in Latin, not in Romanian, just my name, twice. I left the room immediately. By morning, Daniela was still unresponsive. Her vitals were stable, but her eyes remained open, unfocused, glassy. Father Angel arrived with a letter in his coat pocket. He unfolded it in the chapel and handed it to me with trembling fingers. "The Vatican has responded," he said. "We have permission." The church had approved a formal exorcism request. The exorcism would take place on April 3rd inside the hospital, a sealed, disused wing on the 3rd floor, abandoned since the late 1980s and long rumored to be haunted by patients and staff. Ironically, it was the only place left where the church could conduct the rite in secret. "Are you sure she's still possessed?" I asked. Angel lit a candle and stared into the flame. "No, I think she's empty now." I didn't like his tone. "Then why the exorcism?" He met my eyes. "Because whatever was in her didn't leave. It moved." Security footage from the 3rd floor had stopped functioning 2 days ago. No explanation. The technicians couldn't repair it. Cables were fine. Power normal. But no footage recorded, as if that wing had been blacked out from inside. Then there was the issue of room 301. It had been sealed for decades, ever since a fire broke out in 1987, killing 2 nurses and a patient. The cause had never been found. The official report cited faulty wiring. The staff had a different name for it. They called it the house. When Angel and I went to inspect room 301, we found the walls covered in writing. Not vandalism, not graffiti. This had been written from inside, from a time before Daniela was even born. Latin prayers, backwards. Some scratched in ash, others painted in what looked alarmingly like dried blood. And in the center of the floor, a faint wax outline of a circle. My heart dropped. It was identical to the one from Daniela's cellar. Same dimensions, same directional glyphs. This wasn't new. This had happened before. Back in Daniela's room, I sat with her again. She hadn't eaten or moved in 3 days. I leaned in close and said softly, "What is the house?" Her lips didn't move, but her hand did. It twitched, once, then again. Then, slowly, she raised it and pointed toward the door. Not at the door, through it. She was pointing toward the 3rd floor. Later that night, as preparations for the exorcism began, Mirella arrived unexpectedly. She looked pale, exhausted. "I had a dream," she said. "A nightmare." She shook her head. "No, it was quiet. Daniela was there. She was standing in an empty room with walls made of stone. She looked at me and said," Mirella hesitated, then whispered, "Don't let them open the door." That phrase kept repeating in my mind. Don't let them open the door. But which door? The one in the hospital? The one in the cellar? Or something else entirely? At 3:33 a.m., the alarms on the 2nd floor began to blare. Patients were screaming. Lights flickered. One of the security guards swore he saw a figure walking down the east wing, barefoot, long-haired. But when they checked the hallway, no one was there. Daniela remained in her bed, still motionless. But her mouth was open, not wide, just barely. Like she was breathing something in, or letting something out. Father Angel called it the thinning. When the veil between worlds begins to stretch, time slips, meaning twists. Whatever we're dealing with, it's not inside her anymore, but she's still connected to it. And the house? Angel looked at me and said with absolute certainty, "The house is not a building, it's an idea, a door." And then, almost to himself, "And someone's trying to open it." April the 1st, 2004, 2 days before the scheduled exorcism. Daniela had not spoken again since the woods. Her body remained stiff, her hands twisted inward slightly, fingers bent in unnatural angles. Medical staff referred to it as neurological rigidity, but Angel called it something else. "She's resisting," he whispered, "not us, it." Her eyes remained open most hours, blinking but empty. Yet something changed that morning. She began following people with her gaze, not turning her head, just her eyes, slowly, calculating. Especially Angel. In preparation for the exorcism, the church had requested 3 things. 1. A sealed location, room 301. 2. No hospital staff to be present except emergency personnel. 3. A complete removal of any electrical devices, clocks or cameras from the 3rd floor. Angel insisted on it. "It distorts time," he told me. "Things skip, hours vanish. You don't want to watch that later. you won't know what's real. On the morning of the 1st, I drove to Daniela's village, Satumare, to speak again with the midwife, the woman who had assisted at Daniela's birth 19 years ago. Her name was Sorina Vladuts, now 71, frail, nearly blind in one eye. She greeted me on her porch wrapped in a brown shawl, and when I mentioned Daniela's name, her expression hardened. "That child should have died in the womb," she said bluntly. "We tried to stop it." "What do you mean?" "There was trouble. Her mother hemorrhaged early. The heartbeat would stop for hours, then return. Stop, return again. Doctors gave up, but the baby kept surviving." She took a slow breath and whispered, like something else was keeping her alive. According to Sorina, Daniela was born on October 13th, 1984, a date that had meant nothing to me until I returned to the hospital and looked into the old records from room 301. The fire, the one in 1987 that closed down the 3rd floor, it happened on October 13th, 3 years to the day after Daniela's birth. Back in the hospital, room 301 had been cleared, wooden boards nailed over the windows, candles arranged in each corner, a single iron-framed hospital bed in the center, 2 small tables, one for the priest's tools, the other for holy water, oil and salt, and in the middle of the room, they had redrawn the wax circle, identical to the one from Daniela's cellar. Angel stood silently over it, a hand on the cross around his neck. "She won't make it through this without us," he said. "But if we're not careful, we won't make it through either." Daniela's father, Julian, came later that day. His hands shook as he lit a candle in the chapel. He hadn't spoken more than a few words since she'd been institutionalized. I asked him what he remembered most from her childhood. "She never cried," he said, "never screamed, not once, even when she was sick." He hesitated. "And animals didn't like her. Dogs, horses, they kept their distance." That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was what he said next. "There was a time, around 7 or 8, she used to stare at the cellar door for hours. Not open it, just sit and look at it." He paused. "One night we woke up and found her inside the cellar, alone, sitting in the circle. That was over a decade ago, before the Latin, before the voices, before the screaming. That night, the nurses reported Daniela had bitten her own tongue. She had begun gnawing on it slowly, until blood filled her mouth and dripped down her chin. By the time they sedated her, she had carved a jagged wound under her tongue." Angel looked at the injury. "She's trying to silence herself," he murmured. "Not to stop pain, but to stop leaking." "Leaking what?" He looked me in the eyes. "Him." In an effort to prepare, I read the Rituale Romanum late into the night, the official Catholic rite of exorcism. It wasn't as dramatic as Hollywood. No shouting, no spinning heads. It was slow, prayers, repetition, sacred objects, a test of endurance as much as faith. I found myself underlining one section. The demon is strongest when unchallenged. It roots itself in secrecy and familiarity. Remove those, and you remove its shelter. Was that what we'd done? Or had we only provoked it? April the 2nd, one day before. I found Daniela's sister Mirella in the hospital chapel. She had brought an old photo, the 2 of them as girls, smiling in a field behind their home. She held it to her chest. "She's in there somewhere," she whispered. "I know it. You still believe it's not her fault?" She looked at me, tearful but defiant. She didn't ask for this. No, I thought, she didn't. But something had. In the early hours of the morning, Daniela sat up in bed. No one saw her do it. She'd been immobile for nearly a week. But there she was, spine perfectly straight, eyes open. And she spoke. Only once. To the nurse. She whispered, "He's in the room." The nurse turned. There was no one there. When she turned back, Daniela was lying down again, mouth closed, eyes shut, but still breathing. It was just after 7 a.m. when the hospital doors were locked. No visitors, no staff past the 2nd floor. Only the emergency generator kept the lights on. Phones were disabled, the main elevator deactivated. A priest, 2 nurses, 1 doctor on standby, me and Daniela. This is what the church had authorized. Room 301 was cold despite the sealed windows. A strange humidity hung in the air, heavy and metallic. The kind of stillness you feel underground. Angel arrived last, wearing only his cassock and a small wooden cross. He carried nothing else. No holy relics, no dramatic theatrics. He stepped in, looked at Daniela, then asked us to close the door. The rite had begun. Daniela was strapped to the bed with thick canvas restraints. Her eyes were shut, breathing even. But Angel paused. "Don't look away from her face," he warned quietly. "No matter what happens." He began the prayers in Latin. Exorcizo te, immundissime spiritus, omnis incursio adversari, omnis legio, in nomine Domini nostri, Jesu Christi. The cadence was slow, steady. Daniela didn't move for the first few minutes. Then her breathing changed, from slow, passive rhythm to something more deliberate. Each inhale sounded wet, not labored but unnatural, like something was controlling the breath, not using it. Then came a whisper, not from her lips, but from under the bed. I heard it clearly, 3 syllables, foreign, like Latin but older. The nurse standing near the door began to cry silently. I remember how her hands shook over her mouth. Angel did not stop reading. Within 20 minutes, Daniela's body arched violently, pulling against the restraints. The straps across her wrists cut into the skin. Her face contorted, not in pain, but like something stretching her skin from inside. Then, slowly, her mouth opened. Not in a scream, not in pain. A smile, wide, thin, controlled. She opened her eyes. They were glassy, but focused. She was looking directly at me. Not Angel, not the nurses, me. And then she spoke in my voice. Perfect mimicry, the cadence, the tone, everything. "You left the tape recorder under your coat pocket." I hadn't told anyone I was carrying one. It was hidden in my coat, on a hunch. Turned off, but there. I froze. Daniela, or whatever spoke through her, turned back to Angel, who had not flinched once. "Sacha, tu es relictus." Priest, you are abandoned. Angel didn't look up. He kept reading. "Imperat tibi Deus pater." She began thrashing harder. The restraints snapped at the ankle. One strap, thick military canvas, tore like paper. Angel stopped reading. "Get the leg tied again," he said calmly. As the nurse bent forward to secure it, Daniela vomited a dark red liquid onto the floor. Not blood, something thicker, like wine left in a crypt. The air filled with a rancid, fermented stench. Every candle flickered. Then her head turned sharply and she spoke again. "He's not listening, priest." Her voice was now layered. One layer her own, another deeper, guttural, male, a third, higher, almost childlike, all speaking at once. Angel changed his tone. He pressed the crucifix to her forehead. She screamed, not in pain, but in hatred. A sound that didn't rise or fall. It didn't come from her lungs at all. And then, silence. Completely. The candles went out. The silence was unnatural. No hum of electricity, no sound of wind. It was too quiet, like sound had been sucked out of the room. I reached to turn on my tape recorder, instinctively. Before my fingers touched the button, Daniela whispered, "Don't, it won't play back." I froze. She turned her head toward me again. Her eyes, her pupils had narrowed like a snake's. And then she said, "I told you, he's already in the room." Angel resumed. He retrieved a small satchel from his coat, salt, sacramental oil, and a white cloth. He dabbed her forehead with the oil and recited the prayer to St. Michael. Daniela began to convulse, violently. Her back lifted off the bed, her limbs twisted at impossible angles. The crack of her shoulder dislocating made one of the nurses gasp, but Daniela didn't scream. She laughed, not loud, not mocking, quiet and measured. Angel did not stop. Et nunc sancta Michael, princeps militiae celestis. Then she spoke Latin back to him, perfectly, mocking every phrase with corrupted inversions. Et nunc mi sancta Michael, voca me, voca nos. And now, dear Saint Michael, call me, call us. 45 minutes had passed. Daniela stopped seizing. Her body dropped flat onto the bed. Then she began to sing, a Romanian children's rhyme. Julian, her father, had told me it was a song he used to hum to her as a baby. It was eerie not because of the song, but because of her voice. It sounded younger than her own, like a child of 6 or 7. She sang it clearly, word for word, as if remembering it with fondness. Angel grew pale. He took a step back and whispered, "It's mimicking her memories, not hers anymore." And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Suddenly, Daniela's voice shifted again, now sounding like her sister Mirella. "She begged us not to open it." Angel turned to me. "What is she talking about?" "I don't know." But I did. The cellar door. Daniela had once begged her sister to keep it shut, years ago. How would this thing know that? And then came the final line of the session, spoken in a clear male voice from Daniela's mouth. "You already opened it. You let me out." At 8:05 a.m., Angel closed the ritual. The first session was over. He looked at me as we left the room. "She won't survive a second one," he said, "and I'm not sure we will either." The corridor outside room 301 smelled like stale iron and sweat. Nobody spoke as we walked out. Not the doctor, not the nurses, not even Father Angel. We looked at each other like strangers who had survived something unspoken, unsure if it had truly happened the way we remembered it. But we all carried the same image. Daniela's body twitching, then still. Her voice not hers. The room colder than death. I stepped outside to get air. My recorder, the one Daniela had somehow mentioned without ever seeing, was still in my coat pocket, turned off. I pressed the button just to check. Dead, batteries full. Still wouldn't power on. The first sign we weren't dealing with something merely psychological. Angel joined me near the hospital's side entrance about 10 minutes later. He was pale, drained. He didn't look like a man of God anymore, just a man who had aged 10 years in 1 hour. "She's hosting more than one," he said quietly. I looked at him, uncertain. "Entities," he clarified. I felt at least 3, possibly 4. I asked what he meant by felt. He didn't answer right away. He simply rubbed the bridge of his nose and said, "It's not always something you can name. Sometimes the air changes around them, the way a room warps." "Has that happened to you before?" "Yes, once, in Suceava. A case that never made it to the church's records. Girl died on the 5th night. That shut me up. By midday, the hospital director had called off further rituals until reviewed by Bucharest. But Angel disagreed. "She will not last," he said again. "It's feeding now, growing. If we stop, we give it time to bury itself." Julian, Daniela's father, was brought in for consent. He sat in the waiting room, eyes sunken, hands red from over-scrubbing. He hadn't gone home in 2 days. When the doctor explained what had happened, carefully omitting the more disturbing details, Julian just nodded and said, "We continue." And then he looked at me. "Was it her voice?" he asked softly. "Yes," I admitted. He closed his eyes. "Then it's already inside, whatever it is." That night I reviewed every piece of documentation I had, medical reports, recordings from the first week, transcripts from the sisters' interviews. Something was missing. A thread was loose and I couldn't see where. It wasn't until I reread Mirella's original statement, her words from March 14th, that it struck me. She kept telling me not to go near the chest in the cellar. Chest, not door. In every version of the story afterward, Daniela had said cellar door, but Mirella had said chest. The two weren't the same. I circled the line in my notes. Why had I ignored that detail? April 4th. I asked Julian about the chest. He looked confused at first, then shook his head. "There's no chest in the cellar, just broken furniture, old tools." Nothing she could have seen recently. She hasn't been down there in years. I requested to see it. We drove to the farmhouse outside Vaslui where the family lived, a small crumbling structure with its back facing the woods. Everything was still, unnaturally so. Even the dogs didn't bark as we approached. Julian unlocked the door and led me through the narrow kitchen, past the pantry. The trapdoor to the cellar was flush against the wall, covered by a worn rug. As soon as he pulled it open, the temperature dropped noticeably. Even Julian rubbed his arms. "I don't remember it being this cold," he murmured. We descended. The cellar was barely 6 feet tall, with crumbling stone walls and a dirt floor. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of mildew, oil, and something organic. Not quite rot, but close. I scanned with my flashlight, rusting tools, moldy crates, and then, in the far corner, under a collapsed shelf, a chest, wooden, about 1 meter long, iron braced. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Cobwebs covered it, but I noticed something odd. The dust around the latch had been disturbed recently. "I thought you said there was no chest," I said. Julian stared at it, puzzled. I didn't know that was here. It belonged to my father. I haven't seen it since I was a child. Do you remember what's inside?" He shook his head. I knelt down, inspecting the lock. No key, but there was a faint burned scent coming from the seam. As I reached to touch it, Julian stopped me. "Don't," he said firmly. "We'll wait for Angel." Back at the hospital that evening, Daniela had slipped into a near comatose state. She had stopped speaking, stopped reacting to light or pain, but her breathing remained steady and deep, like someone sleeping peacefully, or someone pretending. Angel inspected her and said nothing for a long time. Finally, he turned to me. "She's gone underground now. It's hiding behind her mind. We'll need to provoke it back out, but carefully. Too much, and it will lash out again." He requested a Bible, a mirror, and a container of holy water to be brought for the next morning. I asked him quietly, "Do you think it came from that chest?" Angel didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Has anyone else opened it since it was found?" "No." "Good," he said. "Then it might still be sealed." "Might? Some seals are ritual-based, not physical. If she opened it even once." His voice trailed off. That night at 2:11 a.m., Daniela woke up. She sat up in her bed, eyes wide open, and began whispering. A nurse nearby thought she was delirious and came closer. Daniela suddenly lunged, nearly biting the nurse's face. The restraint across her shoulder saved her. When security came in, she was repeating the same Latin phrase again and again, "Non eris liber, non eris liber, non eris liber." "You will not be free," over and over, for 23 minutes straight. Then silence. Her head dropped forward, and in the silence, on the monitor beside her, the heartbeat spiked, from 68 to 153 in a second, but her body was still. The following morning began with the stillness of dread. I arrived at the hospital before sunrise. Daniela's room was dark except for the pale light from the hallway leaking in through the open door. She was asleep again, or at least appeared to be. Her breathing was calm, measured, too calm, the kind of stillness that no longer felt human. Nurse Andrea was seated near the window, arms crossed, her jaw clenched. "She hasn't moved since 3 a.m., she whispered. "But the monitors show spikes every few hours." "What kind of spikes?" "Heart rate, brain activity, even blood pressure. It's like something inside her is waking up, but her body stays still." I stared at the sleeping girl. Pale skin, lips slightly parted. A faint mark still lingered along her jawline, a bruise from the first fit. Her hair had been cut short by the staff, easier to manage. She looked more like a patient than a person now. I checked my watch. Angel was due at 9. He arrived at 8:47. We gathered in the meeting room on the 3rd floor. Myself, Father Angel, Dr. Mate, and Julian. Angel laid out his plan calmly. No raised voices, no drama, just procedural. "Phase 1 of a provocation," he explained. We will not attempt a full rite, only the psalms and water. The goal is to draw out whatever's buried, not to exorcise it yet. The doctor raised a concern about mental trauma. Angel simply said, "She's already crossed that threshold. This isn't psychological anymore." We prepared room 301 with ritual items, a crucifix placed at the foot of the bed, a mirror on the opposite wall, holy water in a shallow bowl. Then Angel turned to me. "Before we begin, the chest." Julian and I drove back to the farmhouse. The cellar felt colder than before, not just in temperature, it felt heavy, as though the air itself didn't want us to enter. The chest remained in the far corner, dust now disturbed more clearly. Something had been moving around it. Julian brought a crowbar. I brought gloves. The lock was stiff, corroded, but not truly locked. It came open with one firm crack. What we found inside was not what I expected. Not bones, not a book, but linen. Yellowed, old, possibly pre-war, folded tightly and tied with twine. Inside the cloth bundle were 6 items. 1. A wooden rosary snapped at the cross. 2. A glass vial, empty but reeking faintly of old herbs and burnt wax. 3. A strip of goat leather with unreadable black script across it. 4. A crumpled photo of a child, blurred, water-damaged. 5. A small hand mirror cracked diagonally. 6. And a sealed letter, written in a dialect I couldn't place. Cyrillic, but altered somehow. Julian touched nothing. "None of this is mine," he said. "None of it is my father's." I bagged everything carefully. Back at the hospital, I showed Angel the leather strip. His face changed. "You found that in her home?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes." He turned away. "It's not Romanian, not even Latin, it's pre-Christian, possibly Thracian. This is not supposed to be touched." That evening, provocation began. Daniela was calm, until Angel began reciting Psalm 54. At the 7th line, she opened her eyes. And then, in a tone nothing like her voice, she laughed. Not hysterical, not theatrical. It was worse, calm, cold, familiar, like someone who'd been waiting. Then came the whisper. "Fac nobis pacem, non est hic." Angel froze. "That's not part of any known liturgy," he said quietly. I recorded everything. Her eyes remained on the mirror the entire time. Suddenly, the bowl of water rippled as though disturbed by sound, though no sound was audible to any of us. Then, Daniela's back arched, mouth open, no scream, just a guttural, breathless rasp, like air sucked through bone. "Shut it down," Angel said. The rite was halted. Daniela collapsed back onto the bed. Her pulse was erratic, but before she passed out again, she whispered, "He waits beneath." No one moved, no one spoke. She had never seen the cellar, never been told about the chest. Later that night, I reviewed the audio. There was something beneath her voice, a second frequency, barely perceptible, a kind of low resonance that didn't register as speech. I ran it through isolation software. What emerged wasn't a voice, but a pattern, rhythmic, like coded pulses. 3 beats, pause, 4 beats, pause, 3 again. It wasn't until I checked Morse code that the chill hit me. SOS 343. I didn't sleep that night, and in the corridor outside room 301, the light above the door flickered every 17 seconds. Exactly 17. April 6th. Daniela hadn't spoken again since the phrase, "He waits beneath." She remained sedated under light medical observation, heart rate stable, blood pressure normal. But the real concern wasn't her vitals. It was the way the air shifted when you entered room 301. Everyone felt it. Nurses stayed away unless ordered. The cleaning staff refused to step inside. One even quit. She claimed she heard a man's voice whispering from inside the floor. Angel didn't dismiss her. He simply nodded and said, "It's listening now." The chest's contents had been locked in my office drawer at the hospital. I had placed them in separate plastic bags, individually sealed. But that morning, the letter was missing. Not stolen. It had been placed on my desk, perfectly centered, as if someone wanted it found. The plastic bag was unopened, but inside, the folded parchment had shifted position, and there were small ash-like flakes around the edges. I never saw anyone go in. There were no signs of forced entry. When I asked security to check the overnight footage of the hallway outside my office, the system had frozen between 2:11 and 2:13 a.m., exactly when Daniela had stirred in her bed, whispering in her sleep again. The letter, originally written in what looked like altered Cyrillic, was sent to a linguist Angel knew in Cluj, a former Orthodox monk turned scholar named Dumitru Stoica. He returned a rough translation that same evening. The letter was dated July 7th, 1871, signed only VD. The child does not weep. She stares at the wall and speaks to no one, except to the shadows that pass through the corners. She draws the symbol in her sleep, always with ash, even if none is near. I have scrubbed it from the cellar floor 3 times. Still it returns. I fear it was not the rite that failed, but the gate that never shut. The circle cracks with time. The house creaks at night, and she listens to it. I do not know if the spirit entered her, or if she opened herself to it willingly. When I showed this to Julian, Daniela's father, he went pale. "That's not our family," he said. "I don't know these people." But when I asked him about any relatives that may have lived on the land before, grandparents, cousins, anyone, he hesitated. "My father never spoke about his parents," he admitted. "Only said we came from deep in the east, near Tulcea." I made a note. The region near Tulcea is home to ancient pagan burial sites, some older than Roman occupation. We were dealing with something much older than Catholicism. Later that day, Angel called a private meeting with me in the chapel. He looked more worn than I'd ever seen him, hands shaking slightly, his voice no longer firm, but hoarse. "I've made a decision," he said. "We can't wait for Bucharest any longer. Tomorrow night we conduct the full rite." Full rite. All prayers, full litanies of the saints, the binding, the interrogation. I paused. "You mean you're going to ask it who it is?" He nodded. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And what if it answers?" He looked me straight in the eyes. "Then we pray it's lying." That evening, I returned to Daniela's room with one objective, to ask her about the chest. Not the cellar, not the possession, just the chest. She was awake, barely. Her head turned slightly when I entered. Her eyes followed me, but her body didn't move. She looked like someone trapped behind glass. I sat next to her. Softly, I said, "The chest in your basement. You knew about it, didn't you?" Her lips parted, not in speech, in a smile. Then she said something chilling in a half breath. "He was never inside it." That night we got the call. Mirella, Daniela's sister, had collapsed at her apartment. She was admitted to the hospital with a high fever, disorientation, and partial amnesia. The doctors thought it was viral encephalitis, but when I visited her later that night, she held my wrist and said, "You brought it back from the house." "What?" "The thing in the chest. You didn't just open it, you freed it." She began to tremble violently. Nurses arrived and sedated her. She slept for 16 hours. At 3 a.m., Daniela began reciting a list of names in her sleep, Latin names. Some we recognized as Roman saints, but others were older, not on any canonized list. Some were Thracian, others Babylonian. Angel, sitting by her bedside, wrote each one down, 38 names in total. At the end of the list, Daniela muttered, "Only one stayed, the rest went back. But he stayed, because he likes this place, because it's quiet." By dawn, something had changed in her face. Not an expression, not movement. It was something else. The way her skin reflected light. Her eyes, once flat, now had a depth behind them. Something watching. Not sleep-deprived, not mentally ill, but aware. Calm, like it was waiting for something. April 7th, just after midnight. The preparations began. Angel refused to perform the full rite in the hospital. "Too many spirits wandering these halls," he said, "and too many doubts." Instead, We arranged to move Daniela to the chapel at the edge of the hospital grounds, a building constructed in the late 1800s with stone foundations and a locked crypt beneath. Only 5 people were permitted inside that night. Father Angel, myself, Mihai, Sister Alina, a nun trained in spiritual care, Dr. Banu, for emergency observation, and Daniela. No cameras, no phones, no documentation. That was Angel's condition. He said it had to be witnessed, not recorded. Daniela had been quiet during the transfer. She sat upright in the wheelchair, thin, unmoving, with her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes never blinked as the orderlies rolled her down the corridor, flanked by 3 of us. The staff watched from doorways, silent. As we passed the ICU ward, the monitors inside spiked erratically. 5 different patients had sudden tachycardia. 1 had a seizure. We were told later there had been no medical triggers, just coincidence. But I don't believe in coincidences anymore. The chapel's interior was cold, stone floor, high wooden beams, dust suspended in air like snowflakes that refused to land. Candles were lit. A single crucifix hung above the altar. No icons, no statues, no distractions. Angel led Daniela to the front row and instructed us not to speak unless spoken to. "Your voice will carry," he warned, "not just to her." He began the rite at exactly 3 a.m. First came the prayers of protection, Psalm 91, the Litany of the Saints. He recited them in a whisper, pacing in slow circles around Daniela, who sat motionless on the wooden bench. For the first 40 minutes, there was no response. Then, as he began, "Exorcizo te," Daniela's left hand began to twitch, at first subtly, then violently, as if something were pushing back against her bones. But her face remained calm, eyes closed, breathing steady. She began to hum, a child's lullaby, off-key, barely audible. Angel stopped. "That's not her," he said. The humming stopped abruptly. Daniela opened her eyes and looked at me, only me. Then she spoke, but not with her voice. The sound was deeper, like 2 layers speaking at once, Daniela's voice underneath something else. "You have doubt in your hands, doctor. You still think she's sick." The hairs on my arms stood up. Angel turned sharply. "Who are you?" Silence, then, "There are no names here, only doors." Suddenly Daniela lurched forward, vomited. But what came out wasn't bile, it was ash, cold, grey-black flakes, like something had burned inside her. Her eyes rolled back. She let out a sharp, guttural cry that turned into laughter halfway through. Alina gasped. Banu moved forward, but Angel raised his hand. "Stay where you are," he said. "It's trying to provoke us." Daniela's body began to shake, but she didn't fall. She stood upright, as if lifted by invisible strings, and took a step forward. Her head jerked unnaturally sideways. Then she turned toward the crucifix. "I remember when you were made," she said in a low hiss. "When they carved you, when they bled for you." Angel walked toward her, opened his Bible. "In the name of Christ I bind you. Reveal yourself." Daniela's jaw clenched so tightly we heard a cracking sound. A molar dropped from her mouth. Blood trickled down her chin. Then came a series of ancient words, not Latin this time. Banu, who had studied Semitic linguistics, whispered beside me, That's Akkadian." We looked at each other. Whatever was inside her, it wasn't Roman, it wasn't medieval, it was older. Her skin began to change. No wounds, no possession scars. But her pores began to darken, like soot was rising beneath the skin. Her breath smelled like copper and wet wood. Then, and I can still hear it now, she said in a voice that wasn't hers, "You opened the chest, but you never asked who built it." She pointed at me. Then toward the chapel's floor. Then she whispered, "He's under your feet." Angel stepped back. "Name yourself," he commanded. "By the blood of Christ, I order you. Name yourself," Daniela screamed. A shriek so high-pitched the windows rattled. Then, quiet. The ash that had spilled on the floor swirled slightly, though no breeze was present. Just as I stepped forward, Daniela collapsed, unconscious, body limp, no pulse. We thought we lost her. but Dr. Banu rushed forward. After 14 seconds of CPR, she gasped and blinked. The voice was gone. For the moment. When she came to, she didn't speak. She didn't recognize anyone. She began weeping, asking where her sister was. She thought it was March. She didn't know what day it was. When we showed her the video footage of herself days earlier, she went pale and shook her head. "That's not me," she whispered. "I would never say those things. That's not me." Then she looked straight at Angel and asked, "Is it over?" He said nothing, because it wasn't. That night I received a call from Sister Alina. She had gone back to the chapel after the rite. The candles, all extinguished, the crucifix, hanging upside down, and scrawled into the stone floor in what looked like dried blood. "You never closed the gate." April 7th, early morning. The phone call from Sister Alina hadn't even ended when I was already pulling on my coat. It was still dark when I arrived at the chapel. A sharp wind whistled through the trees on the edge of the hospital grounds. The chapel door was ajar, not wide but enough to make my skin crawl. Inside, the candles had indeed been blown out. I checked each wick, no wax trails, no recent burning. They had gone out simultaneously, as if suffocated. The crucifix above the altar had been reversed, not removed, not broken, but carefully, deliberately rotated upside down. The wall bore no marks of damage, as if it had willingly turned. But the worst was the floor. In the same spot where Daniela had stood, scratched deep into the stone with some metallic point, were the words, "You never closed the gate." No signature. Just those 6 words, etched with a pressure that had cracked the stone around the letters. I turned and walked out. But as I did, I noticed something I hadn't before. A small brass key lying beneath the front pew, cold to the touch, worn smooth, like it had been handled by many hands over many years. It didn't match any hospital or chapel locks. I took it with me. Daniela was under sedation by the time I returned. She had experienced 3 episodes during the night, none as severe as the ritual, but each accompanied by screaming, vomiting, and incoherent speech. The final episode had included a phrase that the nurse noted phonetically, "Ashur limut." I showed the phrase to Dr. Banu. "It's Akkadian again," she said. "A kind of death blessing, or a curse. Roughly it means Asher, god of war, is my death." She paused. "This isn't just possession. This is something ancient." That morning, Father Angel didn't arrive for his 9 a.m. check-in. I called twice. No answer. By noon, I drove to his residence, a small stone clergy home near the edge of Alba Iulia. His car was parked outside. The lights inside were off. When I knocked, no response. When I pushed the door, it creaked open. Inside, the smell hit me first, old metal and incense. On the floor of his study lay several opened books, handwritten notes in Latin and Old Church Slavonic. I recognized a few titles: the Rituale Romanum, a Greek translation of the Testament of Solomon, and something I didn't know. A thin, black-bound notebook, pages covered in his hurried script. At the top of one page, in thick pen, "Possession Timeline, Daniela C." Below, a list: initial symptom, language anomaly. March 14th, apparition in mirror. March 19th, unexplained knowledge of investigator's history. March 24th, failed preliminary prayer. March 27th, behavioral doubling. April 1st, manifestation of secondary voice. April 4th, physical contradiction, simultaneous muscle tear and weightlessness. April 6th, gate opened. April 7th, ritual night. He had circled the last entry twice. Below it, written in smaller, trembling letters, "I didn't close it. She is the gate." Then a final line: "Return to the crypt beneath the chapel." It began there. At 4 p.m., I returned to the chapel with Sister Alina and Banu. We pried open the trapdoor beneath the altar, old wood, sealed for decades. The hinges screamed. Stone steps led down into darkness. We lit 2 lanterns and descended. It wasn't a large crypt, one room, maybe 20 by 20 feet. Walls lined with burial alcoves, some sealed, some broken open. dust thick on every surface, and in the center, an old wooden chest covered in mold and iron braced. It was locked. But the brass key in my pocket slid in easily. Click. We hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were 3 old parchments too fragile to unfold, a small black stone idol, humanoid but wrong, with a mouth where the forehead should be, and a bundle of hair, long and tied with what looked like dried sinew. At the very bottom was a sealed envelope, addressed, "For the one who opened the gate." I reached for it. As I did, the lanterns flickered. Cold rushed through the room. Behind us, from above, the trapdoor slammed shut. We froze. Sister Alina cried out. I held the letter. Something began to move behind us. The sound of shuffling, bare feet on stone. Banu raised her lantern. There's no one down here. But I already knew. We weren't alone. A whisper echoed around the crypt, too low to make out words. It circled, grew louder. The stone idol tipped slightly forward on its own. Then Daniela's voice, or something using her voice, came from the far alcove. I didn't ask to be opened, but you did it anyway. The idol cracked. The room filled with a stench like sulfur and rotting leaves. Then, silence. We forced the trapdoor open, scrambled out and sealed it behind us. Whatever was down there, it was never supposed to be disturbed. That evening, I opened the letter. The handwriting was Angel's, shaky, as if written in fear. If you are reading this, the ritual failed, not because I lacked faith, but because it was never about banishing. She isn't housing the entity. She is the entity's access point. She is the vessel and the offering. The voice you heard isn't in her, it is through her. You never closed the gate, and I do not know how to close it. April 8th. The silence in Daniela's hospital room was unnatural. The lights were dimmed as always, but something had changed. Even the nurses who once rolled their eyes at the case now walked past her door more quickly than before, avoiding eye contact with the observation window. She hadn't spoken since the night of the ritual. No Latin, no screams, no voice at all. Just silence, heavy and wrong. Her body was still sedated, but she stared at the ceiling with unwavering focus, as if something above her was staring back. I met Dr. Banu outside the room. Her face had aged 10 years in 2 nights. She's stable physically, she said, but EEG activity is completely erratic. Brainwave patterns are firing in ways we haven't seen before, not like epilepsy, not even like REM sleep. Something else. And mentally? I asked. She hasn't blinked in 6 hours. I didn't tell her about the letter from Father Angel, not yet. Instead, I went to the hospital's archive and pulled the blueprints of the building. I had a hunch. Something about the way the trapdoor was hidden, the altar above it. Something deliberate. And there it was. The crypt beneath the chapel had once connected to another chamber, a smaller one, now walled off during post-war renovations. It sat directly beneath Daniela's room. Whatever had been buried down there was now directly beneath her bed. That night, Sister Alina confessed something. She sat in the chapel, trembling, clutching her rosary so tightly the chain had cut into her fingers. Her voice was barely a whisper. Daniela came to the convent when she was 13, you know that. But what we never told anyone was she wasn't baptized until she was nearly 15. I frowned. That's unusual. She refused it at first, said it made her feel cold inside. The priest at the time, Father Elia, said it was nothing, but when the baptism finally happened, the water in the font boiled, not steaming, boiled. And no one reported this? They said it was a pipe fault, but I saw it. The bubbles, the smell, like burnt hair. She stared at the altar. We should have seen the signs. At 3:17 a.m., the hospital alarms were triggered. I ran to Daniela's room. The staff was frozen outside the door. Her restraints had been torn, not unbuckled, torn clean off. Steel and leather shredded as if by claws. She was sitting upright in bed. Her eyes were still wide open, lips moving, but no sound. I stepped into the room against every instinct I had. Her head slowly turned toward me. The left side of her mouth rose into a half smile, unnatural and twitching. And then, in fluent Romanian, she said, "You read the letter." My skin turned to ice. "You want to save her," she whispered, "but you're already part of it." She looked down at her arms. The bruises were back, fresh and almost deliberate. 2 black streaks along each forearm. Symmetrical. "Vessel and offering," she murmured again. "One to open, one to keep it open." "What are you talking about?" I asked. She looked straight through me. "You were marked in the crypt." I stumbled back, lifted my sleeve. A thin, dark red scratch had appeared across my wrist. I hadn't noticed it before. We resedated her under strict supervision, but before the sedatives took hold, she muttered one final phrase. "Nomen meum non loquetur, et tamen audiatur." My name will not be spoken, yet it will be heard. The next morning, I finally went to see Father Angel, or rather what was left of him. He had been found in a roadside ditch 12 kilometers from his home. No car nearby, no coat, no shoes. His hands had been bound in a gesture of prayer, wrists tied so tightly that the skin had broken. His mouth was sewn shut, with black thread. Whoever did it had wanted him silent. The medical examiner noted no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, as if he had accepted it. Inside his coat pocket, police found a torn page of scripture, Mark 5:9. And he asked him, "What is thy name?" And he answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." I returned to the hospital in silence. Daniela was still motionless in her bed, but her face was contorted, like she was hearing something none of us could. And now, in the corridor outside her room, the air felt thicker. The brass key in my pocket, the one from the crypt, was hot to the touch. Banu met me at the hallway corner, her face pale. "She said something else," she whispered, "while you were gone. Not to us, just to the air." "What?" She kept repeating it, over and over, quietly. I asked what it was. She handed me a note she'd scribbled. 5 words. "He's wearing your face now. April 9th. The words echoed in my head. "He's wearing your face now." I hadn't slept. The hospital corridor's artificial lights, the hum of old bulbs, the hollow tapping of nurses' shoes, all of it blurred into an unreality that tightened around my chest. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't make you sleepy, just numb. I opened my notebook to the Latin Daniela had spoken, "Nomen meum non loquetur, et tamen audiatur." I had translated it, yes, but felt it was wrong, too clean. I needed more context. I called an old contact, Andrei Lupescu, professor of ancient theology at Iași University. He picked up on the first ring, as if waiting. When I read him the phrase, there was a pause, then a click of lighter. "Cigarette. Exhale." "You translated it literally." "Yes." "Don't." "Why not?" "Because it's not a translation. It's a phrase of binding." The words were used in late 17th century exorcisms to describe entities that weren't meant to have names. It was a precaution. Speaking their name out loud could invite them. I asked what he meant by invite. Summon. Allow access. A name is a door, especially one that should have stayed shut. Later that afternoon, I went back to Daniela's room. The staff had installed reinforced restraints, leather and metal, industrial grade, yet even they seemed like a delay, not a solution. Sister Alina was there, seated at the foot of the bed, praying. She didn't turn when I entered. "She wept during the night," she said softly. "Not like before. This time, it was human." I looked at Daniela. She was motionless again, but her eyes, finally after nearly 2 days, were closed. Alina reached into her habit pocket and pulled something small into her palm. It was the key from the crypt. "It was under her pillow," she said, "but I had it in my own bag, in my room, locked." My mouth went dry. She placed it in my hand carefully. It felt cold now, heavy. And then she whispered, "I don't think it ever belonged to that lock. I think it called you." That night I drove back to the chapel, alone. The air was thick. The trees around the building barely moved, yet I could hear their rustling, sharp, dry, like bones. I unlocked the main doors with the parish key, but the moment I entered, I felt it. The absence of silence. Not noise, but the sensation that something should be heard, but isn't. Like listening to a recording with all the background frequencies stripped out. My flashlight flickered as I descended into the crypt. The altar above had been dismantled. But beneath it, where we had found the hidden staircase, something had changed. The trap door, it was open again. I didn't open it, but something did. I took the brass key from my pocket, and for the first time I noticed a small inscription near its teeth, almost worn away. I angled the light carefully. It read, "Porta inter nos." I called André again, whispering into the crypt. He translated instantly. "The door between us." April 10th. Daniela's condition shifted again. She began murmuring. Not Latin this time, nor Romanian, but what sounded like a guttural dialect of Aramaic, ancient, fractured. The nurses recorded it, and I sent the audio to André. He called back an hour later, shaken. "This isn't liturgical Aramaic. This is proto-language, bits of ancient Babylonian, even pre-Sumerian fragments. This isn't something she could know. No one could." He paused. Then, "She's reciting a ritual, a liturgy of descent. It's calling something up." I felt my hands shake. The name was never meant to be spoken, the key was never meant to be used, and the vessel, Daniela, was never meant to live through this. In the hallway outside her room, a nurse slipped me a note. She didn't give her name, just walked off quickly. I unfolded the paper. "She speaks to us in our dreams. She shows us your face, but your eyes are black." I didn't know what to believe anymore. But when I went into the hospital bathroom and stared at my own reflection, for a moment, just a second, my pupils looked too wide, too still. April 11th, 1:44 a.m. The cameras in Daniela's room glitched out for 5 minutes. When they returned, she was standing, unbound, in the corner of the room, facing the wall. Her mouth wasn't moving, but the audio recorded low whispers echoing from the ceiling. And then, from her own mouth, a single line, clear and cold. "The other priest is next. April 11th, 2:11 a.m. They found Father Gabriel in his quarters behind the monastery. The door was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry. He was slumped in a chair facing the wall, his rosary clenched in both hands, unmoving, breathing, barely. A small candle had burned out on the windowsill beside him. The wax had spilled over, forming a pale pool like dried milk across the wood. Above him, on the wall, written in something brown and smeared, were 4 words: "Patres non resistunt igni." André translated it the moment I called. "Fathers do not resist the fire." I didn't ask what fire. When I arrived at the monastery's infirmary, the priest hadn't spoken a word. He stared forward, lips slightly parted, murmuring the tail end of prayers in Latin, but never completing them. The attending friar told me he had urinated on himself and vomited twice. There were no bruises, no marks, nothing physically wrong. Just the trauma of something seen, something encountered, so severe that his mind had sealed itself off like a tomb. Sister Alina arrived shortly after. Her face was pale, lips trembling. She didn't speak until we were alone. "He went to Daniela's room before this happened," she said. I stared at her. "You didn't tell anyone?" "He said God was stronger than fear. He insisted he had to pray over her alone. I told him it was foolish, but he locked the door behind him. 20 minutes later, he was gone." I swallowed. "Did the camera record it?" She shook her head. "The footage was corrupted, just static." Back at the hospital, Daniela hadn't moved since the camera blackout, but the nurses reported something new. They said that for the first time she had smiled. Just once, just briefly. Not a full smile, but a twitch at the corner of her lips, enough to turn the air in the room ice cold. When I entered her room, she lay as before, motionless, pale, rope-bound. I sat down beside her and held the recorder to her face. "Do you know what you did to Father Gabriel?" She didn't blink. Her mouth opened. No effort, no strain, just a gentle parting of the lips, and she whispered, "He asked the fire to come. I let it in." April 11th, 5:32 p.m. I met with Father Andrei Lupu again, one of the only remaining priests willing to consult on the case. He reviewed the footage, the notes, and the voice recordings. Then he told me something I hadn't considered. "This isn't just a possession, not the way you think." Then what is it? This is an infiltration, a slow wearing down, a displacement. The girl you see, Daniela, she's not being controlled like a puppet. She's being rewritten. The voice isn't riding inside her. It's hollowing her out, filling in the gaps. I felt a heaviness in my chest. He continued. The thing speaks through her now, not within her. That's an old distinction in demonic theology. The most dangerous cases are those where the entity becomes indistinguishable from the host, where it takes over the soul by convincing it to step aside willingly. "Why would a soul do that?" I asked. His answer chilled me. "Because it's tired." That night, Sister Alina gave me an envelope that had arrived at the monastery's mail slot. No stamp, no name, just a folded photo inside. It was a still frame from the hospital security feed. But it wasn't Daniela, it was me standing in her room, except I wasn't there. Not that night, not that hour. I was at home, asleep. My phone logs and apartment door security confirmed it. In the image, I stood in the left corner of the frame behind Daniela, my hands clasped, watching, but my eyes, in the photo, were pitch black. No whites, no irises, just darkness. April 12th. The hospital chaplain, a gentle old man named Father Petru, performed a quiet blessing outside Daniela's door, despite church orders forbidding further rituals without approval. He didn't even finish the prayer. Something unseen knocked the crucifix from his hand. Hard. The metal bent when it hit the floor. And then Daniela said, in perfect French, "Il n'y a pas de croix ici." There is no cross here. I've begun dreaming of the crypt again, of the staircase beneath the altar, of the brass key turning itself in my palm, of a face, or my face, emerging from behind stone, but with a mouth that doesn't move and eyes that drip tar. The last dream ended with me, the dream version of me, whispering to the real me, "We are not waiting for the priest, we are waiting for you." April 13th, 2004, 3:04 a.m. The dream woke me again. Same corridor, same breathless dark. I stood barefoot on cold stone, somewhere ancient. The hallway led toward a pulsing orange glow, like candlelight flickering from deep below. But this time, the dream changed. As I turned a corner, I came face to face with Daniela. She was upright, free of ropes, her hands folded like a nun in prayer. But her face, it wasn't bruised anymore. It was clean, pale, serene. She stared directly at me, and then her lips moved. The altar is not holy anymore. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. Later that morning, I visited the church of Saint Dumitru again. Something about Daniela's dream voice, something about the word altar, lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. I asked the caretaker if there was ever a crypt or cellar beneath the church floor. He looked surprised. "You mean the old ossuary?" That was the first I had heard of it. Apparently in the 1800s, the church had sealed off a narrow tunnel beneath the altar that led to a catacomb. It was filled with the remains of plague victims, a forgotten mass grave. When I pressed, he finally agreed to let me see it. April 13th, 2:11 p.m. We descended stone stairs behind the sacristy. They creaked with age and damp. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The air smelled of old dust and iron. At the bottom was a rusted metal door. The caretaker fumbled with a ring of keys, finally forcing it open with a groan. The space beyond was small, more like a vault than a tunnel. Rough stone walls lined with stacked bones, femurs and skulls layered in forgotten silence. But it wasn't the bones that disturbed me. It was the writing. On the far wall, someone had carved Latin, so deep the letters were gouged into the stone. Andre later translated it for me. When the tongue of fire rests on a liar's mouth, the truth shall burn its way through. Beneath it, another line had been etched more recently. The strokes were uneven, almost frantic. She is not hers anymore. I asked the caretaker who had last entered this space. He said the only priest who ever spoke of it was Father Gabriel. April 13th, 5:20 p.m. Back at the monastery infirmary, Father Gabriel was conscious again, still pale, still silent. But when he saw me, he raised a trembling hand. He scribbled something onto my notepad, just a single name, Hippolyta. I had never heard that name before. I asked Sister Alina if the word meant anything to her. She flinched. "That's a name not spoken here anymore," she whispered. "One of the early nuns, from the 1800s. They say she took her own life after a long, unapproved exorcism. The church tried to bury the records." "What kind of exorcism?" "The kind where the victim begged to keep the demon, said it was the only thing that ever listened to her." April 13th, 9:15 p.m. I pulled the camera footage from the night of Father Gabriel's breakdown. The hospital had claimed the file was corrupted, all static, but I asked their IT staff to recover what they could. What we found? A frame. Just one. For less than a second. In it, Daniela is seen levitating, no more than 6 inches off the bed, her limbs stiff like stone. Her mouth is open wide, the jaw unnaturally stretched. Blood pours from her nose and eyes like tears. And behind her, faint, almost hidden in the corner, is a shadow, a silhouette of a woman, head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. The dress was old, 19th century, monastic, like something from an old painting. No one else was in the room. April 14th, 1:33 a.m. Daniela began screaming again, this time in Aramaic. It took hours to confirm. A scholar from Cluj University verified the audio. She repeated only one phrase over and over. "She has opened the gate. She has opened the gate." No one knew what it meant. The doctors increased her sedative dosage. It didn't help. She kept repeating the words even in her sleep. April 14th, 3:45 a.m. Father Gabriel passed away in his sleep. The official report said cardiac arrest, brought on by a traumatic neurological event. But his last note, found in the side of his Bible, said something else. "Tell them it doesn't burn with fire. It burns with hunger." April 14th, 6:10 a.m. Sister Alina gave me something unexpected, an old diary page, torn and brittle. It had been hidden behind a loose stone in the monastery's library. The ink was faded, but the name at the top was clear, Sister Hippolyta. The entry read, "She came to me in dreams, a voice within light, but the light burned too bright. It entered through prayer. Now I no longer know where she ends and I begin. I fear the soul has seams we were never meant to pull apart." I folded the page and placed it in my case notes. Daniela's screams had stopped. But when I visited her room one last time before sunrise, I noticed something strange. She was no longer tied down. The ropes had all come undone, not cut, not frayed, just loose as if they had slipped free by themselves. And in her lap sat a small iron key, identical to the one in my dreams. April 14th, 2004, 7:02 a.m. The iron key was cold, too cold. I picked it up gently, careful not to wake Daniela, though a part of me knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was too steady, her face too blank. Her eyes were closed, but it was as if she could still see me. I held the key in my palm and turned to Sister Alina. "Did anyone come in here last night?" She shook her head. I checked her every hour. The door was locked from the outside. No one's touched her restraints. I didn't respond. I just looked at the key again. It was black, ridged, old, like it belonged in a church crypt or a rusted lockbox. Somehow I knew it wasn't a key meant to open anything physical, or if it did, it was something that should stay closed. That evening I dreamt again. April 15th, 3:40 a.m. Dream entry. Same corridor, cold, damp, the sound of dripping water. But now I held the key in my hand. The hallway ended in a stone archway, and behind it, a door, iron-plated, heavy, covered in carvings too worn to read. The keyhole was ancient, jagged. I stepped forward. My body moved without permission. My hand lifted the key. It slid in, twisted. And when the door creaked open, I didn't see fire. I saw her, Daniela, or something wearing her face, except her mouth stretched far too wide, and her voice came not from her throat, but from behind me, inside me. You are the witness. You opened it. I woke to the sound of my own scream. April 15th, 7:22 a.m. Daniela was sitting upright when I arrived, still, calm. Her wrists bore rope burns, but she no longer struggled. Her lips moved silently, muttering some chant beneath her breath. I recorded the audio and sent it to Andre again. The translation came back within an hour. Hippolyta is not gone. She made a vow beneath the altar, a body for a door, a soul for a seal. He attached a note. This isn't Romanian, not entirely. Some of the structure is pre-Christian, pre-Latin even. It's not a chant, it's a rite. I think she's quoting something very old. I went back to the ossuary beneath the church. The stone-carved Latin on the wall was unchanged, but below it something new had appeared, not carved but drawn in blood. A symbol, a wide circle with a vertical line through its center and 3 curved hooks branching from the bottom. It was the same one I'd seen etched on Daniela's back weeks earlier, during her spasms. Except now, I recognized it. A scholar from Cluj confirmed it for me later. It's not Christian. It predates written scripture. It was found at Neolithic sacrifice sites across Eastern Europe. It symbolized a threshold spirit. Not a demon exactly, but an entity that exists between states, between waking and dreaming, between death and birth. A gatekeeper. April 15th, 2:31 p.m. I sat in the monastery courtyard with Sister Alina. She had aged a decade in a week. Her voice trembled when she spoke. We shouldn't have kept her here. The exorcism, it's not working. We've tried the Roman ritual 3 times, every time it gets worse. Why keep going then? She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me an envelope. Inside were 5 black and white photos, dated 1949, taken from the monastery archive. In them was a girl, maybe 16, strapped to a bed in the same infirmary room Daniela now occupied. Her mouth was sewn shut. In the background stood 3 nuns, 1 priest, and 1 other figure, barely visible in the corner, cloaked in black, face obscured. On the back of the photo was written a name in pencil, Hippolyta. April 15th, 8:10 p.m. Daniela spoke clearly for the first time in 2 days. We weren't expecting it. I was reading one of the monastery's old texts aloud to her, a passage from the Book of Tobit, when she opened her eyes and whispered, "She wants her name back." I froze. Who does? Daniela's eyes didn't blink. The one they buried in silence, the one they trapped beneath the altar. She is awake now. Hippolyta? Her head tilted slightly. Then her lips split into a smile that did not belong to her. That's not her true name. That was the skin she wore in life, but names rot too. April 16th, 1:01 a.m. The Vatican liaison finally arrived. Father Mihai Lucan, a stern, slow-moving man in his 50s, tall with deep-set eyes and a voice like gravel. He had been briefed on the case. He brought with him a thick leather case, rituals, relics, oils. He insisted the exorcism begin that night, but he requested one thing first: seal the ossuary. I asked why. Because if the gate was opened, we must not leave it unattended. April 16th, 3:30 a.m. Start of the ritual. I watched from behind the safety glass as Father Lucan began. Daniela was already growling. Not screaming, growling, low, guttural, like a caged animal remembering a forgotten language. The air was heavy, not cold, not hot, just thick, like it didn't want to be breathed. Candles flickered violently, though there was no breeze. Father Lucan pressed the crucifix to her forehead. She hissed, recoiled, but didn't scream. He recited in Latin, slow, deliberate. Exorcizo te, omnis spiritus immundi. Her hands twitched. Her spine arched unnaturally. Then her mouth opened. She didn't speak. She laughed. And then she said, in perfect Latin, "You came too late. I am already standing inside the walls." April 16th, 3:36 a.m. Monastery Infirmary, isolation room. Daniela's voice didn't match her throat. It was far too deep, aged, coarse, as if dragged through centuries of gravel and ash. "You came too late. I'm already standing inside the walls." Father Lucan stopped mid-ritual. His expression didn't change, but I saw the way his fingers gripped the crucifix tighter. He turned to Sister Alina and motioned to continue the reading. She resumed with trembling voice, "Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus." Daniela's body convulsed. Her neck jerked, not side to side, but upward, like something inside her was pulling her spine by invisible thread. Her mouth stayed open. Her eyes rolled back. Then came the voice again, this time not from her lips. It echoed from behind the walls. The room shook, not violently, but with intent, as if a presence had shifted its weight inside the monastery's very bones. Candles along the edges hissed and snuffed. Father Lucan dipped his fingers into the oil and pressed it to her chest. "Domine, libera hanc famulam tuam," Daniela shrieked, but her body didn't move. Her arms stayed pinned. Only her face contorted, in disgust, in mockery. And in the silence that followed, she whispered in Romanian, "He buried her alive." April 16th, 4:12 a.m. The exorcism paused, not because Daniela lost consciousness, she didn't, but because something knocked on the wall behind the bed. 3 slow knocks. Father Lucan stepped back. The ritual book trembled slightly in his hands. For the first time, he looked at me directly. "Take me to the ossuary." We descended the narrow steps. The stone corridor smelled stronger now, damp earth, rot, something faintly sulfuric. The torchlight flickered violently even without wind. At the threshold of the bone chamber, we stopped. The seal, the one we'd placed just hours earlier, was cracked. Thin lines, like veins, spread across the wax and ash. The bones inside the far alcove were scattered, and on the back wall, drawn again in what we knew was blood, the symbol had reappeared, larger now, and beneath it a phrase in Latin. "Porta stands, clavis data est." The gate stands, the key has been given. Lucan inhaled deeply. Not fear, resignation. She is not the first vessel. April 16th, 5:28 a.m. Infirmary Daniela was awake, still tied, still whispering. Only now she was whispering my name, over and over. "Michnea, Michnea, Michnea." She'd never said it before. Sister Alina stood at a distance, lips moving silently in prayer. I entered. She smiled at me. Wide, too wide. "You were in the dream." I sat down slowly. "You mean, when I saw the door?" She nodded once. Her voice was calm now, soft. "The stone gate, the iron key, the 3 hooks below the circle." She looked at me without blinking. "You opened it. You let her out." I felt something in my chest, not fear, guilt. And in that moment, I understood. I hadn't just dreamt of the key. I had used it. I had become part of the rite. April 16th, 6:45 a.m. Father Lucan asked to see the historical records. We spread old manuscripts, photographs, and death records across the rectory table. In a journal from 1949, we found an entry written by the head priest. The girl Hippolyta was not possessed in the common sense. Hers was not a case of infestation, but of inheritance. Something was promised long ago beneath these stones. We sealed her within the walls before the vow could be completed. Her mouth was bound, her name was erased, but even in silence she waits. Father Lucan closed the book quietly, then said only, "The ritual was never finished." April 16th, 8:12 a.m. Daniela began chanting again. Not screaming, not struggling, just chanting, in slow, clear Latin. Corpus pro ostium, sanguis pro sigillum. A body for the door, blood for the seal. I recorded it, played it back. The audio warped, distorted in places, like something was overlaying her voice with another. And in one section, a whisper beneath her words, "We are already inside him." April 16th, 11:10 a.m. Private session with Father Lucan. We stood in the chapel alone. Sunlight barely reached the stained glass windows. He looked tired, more than before. "We're not dealing with one demon," he said. "We're dealing with a binding, an ancient pact. This is older than Rome, older than Scripture. Can it be undone?" He shook his head. "You don't undo a vow made in blood. You finish it, or you sacrifice someone else in its place." That word, sacrifice, lingered. I remembered what Daniela had said, a soul for a seal. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. April 16th, 1:03 p.m. Daniela stopped speaking. For 6 full hours, she sat still, eyes closed. Then she asked for her mother, but when her mother arrived and tried to speak to her, Daniela looked up with dead, flat eyes and said, "You weren't the one chosen. You were only the door." Her mother collapsed, sobbing. I escorted her out. When I returned, Daniela had bitten her own lip open. Blood stained the pillow. And on the white sheet, she had written, using her finger, "He knows now. He dreams now." April 16th, 2:12 p.m. The final exorcism was scheduled for midnight. But before then, Father Lucan wanted the chamber sealed from the outside. "No one enters once the rite begins," he said. "And if something goes wrong, then we finish it beneath the altar." I stared at him. "You mean?" He nodded. "There's a reason the bones were hidden. There's a reason her name was removed. But it's not just Daniela anymore." He looked at me, long, hard. "It's you too." April 16th, 11:54 p.m. Monastery Infirmary Isolation Room. The hallway leading to the room had never felt longer. Candles flickered in sconces set into the stone. The flame bent not with wind, but as if pulled by something just ahead, something breathing inside the walls. I walked behind Father Lucan. Sister Alina followed with a small relic box clutched to her chest, iron nails inside, said to have been taken from a desecrated altar in Argesh. The box vibrated faintly, as though it recognized the presence awaiting us. Daniela had been silent for the last 2 hours, but the air around the door throbbed like something unseen was humming beneath the threshold. As we approached, we saw it. The seal on the infirmary door, the final barrier drawn in ash, blessed oil and salt, was gone, scrubbed clean, as if erased by time itself. Inside, she waited. April 17th, 12:03 a.m. Commencement of final rite. Daniela sat upright, still restrained but calm, her mouth curved in a slight smile, too serene for what we were about to face. Father Lucan began the final exorcism rite in Latin. "Exorcizo te, omnis spiritus immunde, in nomine Dei Patris omnipotentis." The candles in the room burned straight upward, as if frozen in place. Heat radiated from the stone beneath our feet. Daniela's body slowly began to shiver, her head twitching side to side. Then her lips parted. She didn't scream. She laughed, low at first, then louder, hysterical, choking, joyous laughter. And in a voice that belonged to something else, she said, "You still don't know who I am." 12:18 a.m. She spoke in fluent Aramaic, then Greek, then Latin. Father Lucan continued the rite, unwavering. The crucifix in his hand pulsed with heat. Suddenly, Daniela stopped laughing. Her head snapped forward. She looked directly at me. "You called me." I froze. "You dreamt of the key. You crossed the threshold. You fed the seal." My heart pounded. I remembered the nightmares, the voices in sleep, the dream of the iron gate. I had never spoken of them aloud, but she knew. Father Lucan noticed my hesitation. He shouted over the noise rising in the room, "Don't listen to it!" But it was too late. Daniela's face split with an impossible grin. She screamed in Romanian die, "The sacrifice knows it is the sacrifice." 12:34 a.m. The crucifix shattered. A howl ripped from Daniela's throat. Not human, not even animal. It echoed off the stone like a choir of the damned. The walls bled, not metaphorically. Real blood seeped through cracks in the stone. Sister Alina fell to her knees, clutching her rosary. I turned to Father Lucan, horrified. "What is happening?" His face was pale, his voice nearly broke. "The seal isn't breaking, it's opening." 12:41 a.m. Lucan's confession. The ritual paused. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me aside, eyes full of urgency. "I lied to you." "What?" "This isn't about casting it out." He looked at Daniela, still laughing, head now twisting unnaturally from side to side. "This ritual was meant to trap it, like they did in 1949, like they did in the 1600s. But a body is required." I stepped back. No, you said, "It chose you when you crossed the gate in your dream. You opened it. Now it wants you." I shook my head violently. "No, I came to help. I documented. I didn't." He looked me dead in the eyes. "The seal must be fed." 12:55 a.m. The offering. I stood frozen. Daniela was chanting again, but not words this time. Names, my name, Father Lucan's, Sister Alina's, over and over. Then another name, Hippolyta, the girl from 1949. Suddenly I saw her, in my mind, behind my eyes, a figure sewn into the monastery walls, mouth sewn shut, bones etched with script, eyes hollow and still screaming in silence. The entity wasn't attached to Daniela. It had never been. She was the conduit. But I was the completion. And in that moment, Daniela whispered, "Trade me." 12:59 a.m. The choice Father Lucan handed me the iron nail. "Press it to your chest, offer it freely." "What happens to her?" "She lives. You stay." The world around me dimmed. The sound dulled, like being underwater. I looked at Daniela, just 19, her body torn and voice ruined, but still human, still salvageable. And I? I had crossed too far. I had walked willingly into a gate no one else could see. I pressed the nail to my chest. Pain bloomed. Not physical, existential. The room spun. The candles went out. April 17th, 1 a.m. The moment froze. I saw the gate, the real one, in that black space behind my eyes. Iron, stone, bound in chain and Latin, 3 hooks at its base. It opened, and I stepped through. April 17th, 1:01 a.m. outside perspective. Daniela gasped. Her eyes cleared. Her breathing normalized. Father Lucan removed the restraints. Sister Alina sobbed uncontrollably. Daniela looked around, confused. "What? Where am I?" "It's over," Father Lucan whispered. "And Mihnea?" she asked. Father Lucan said nothing, only turned to the corner of the room where my journal sat open, the final page blank, except for a sentence written in blood. "He stands behind the gate now." April 17th, 3:12 a.m. Daniela's room. She sleeps peacefully. She hasn't spoken Latin since, but sometimes just before dawn, she looks toward the far wall and tilts her head as if listening. Once she whispered, "He's still speaking." And when asked who, she said, "The man with the iron key."